Bonjour, Tanshi. Chokma, Sohojafo Lawa Mali, Nahola Menompa Okano John Hampton, Chakashasaya, Ixakoish, Dashtan Chololili. Nahoba Pisachili, I'm the director of the MacKenzie Art Gallery. Oskana Kazategi Regina Achikan Treaty 4 Akon Eliasha. We're here gathered on the traditional and contemporary territory of the Soto, the Nahiawak, Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. That's Métis Nation, Saskatchewan, Western Region 3. So the MacKenzie here is charged with caring for the culture of this territory, and these host nations are the foundation from which Saskatchewan cultural identity is built, expanding and enriched through the diverse cultural understandings brought by all people who now call this place home, all part of that story that we are now here together sharing. So it's with mixed emotions that I welcome you tonight. It's a joyous event, but it's also the start of an end of an era, I'll say. So we're here to celebrate the launch of Whispers from the Vault, the final exhibition Timothy Long will be curating as our head curator as he prepares for his retirement after 35 amazing years at the gallery. So I don't know of another curator in Canada who could say that they've worked their way up from curatorial assistant to assistant curator to head curator, a role that he's had for 23 years here. Tim's first published writings as a curatorial assistant here, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong on stage, but was about the collection. And there is, without a doubt, no one who knows the collection better, nor will there likely ever be anyone else. So anyone who's been on a vault tour with Timothy has surely been in complete awe of his seemingly bottomless knowledge. My first time on a tour, I remember someone was trailing behind the rest of the group, and I saw them point and said, "Oh, what's that up on this rack amongst hundreds of other paintings?" And Tim, 8 feet ahead, didn't even turn around to look and named the artist, the year, told an anecdote, and didn't even break stride on his walk to the next stop on the tour. And I'm not lying, that actually happened. Of course, long before Timothy announced his retirement, I've received many a plea of people saying, you need to record Timothy's vault tours. So Whispers from the Vault is a homage to Timothy's tours. And yes, he's recorded several of his stories as part of the exhibition, and the conversation too is being recorded. And I know that Timothy has some writing plans in his future as well. So, because can you ever truly retire from your passion? So Timothy's impact on the MacKenzie and on the permanent collection in particular could rival even Norman Mackenzie's. And as the name infers, the permanent collection is permanent. When we bring work into the collection, we are vowing to care for it in perpetuity and trust for the community so that legacy lives on. But when a work comes into the collection, it also brings with it its own history, its life, its vitality. It holds the meaning imbued in it by the artist, the history and social conditions from which it emerged, the stories that we tell in our acquisition rationales. And as those objects live on in the collection, then they continue to grow and shift contexts through changing social understandings, through the recontextualization and exhibitions by new curators, new audiences, and new relationships and webs of meaning that come with that. And that is a legacy that is bigger than any one of us. And these cultural belongings, both these tangible and the intangible, are part of the network of interrelations that help us build a collective identity. So these objects that can both carry and inspire and transmit knowledge that exceeds the artists or the curators or any single imagination. And Whispers from the Vault gives us a glimpse about how these objects speak and what they can teach us. So tonight, in the spirit of that exchange, Tim will be in conversation with Felicia Gay. Felicia is the MacKenzie's newest curator, but a longtime contributor to the Saskatchewan artistic landscape as the founder of Redshift Gallery in Saskatoon through her time as curator at Wanuskewin Gallery and continuing here in Regina. She is a PhD candidate at the U of R and first joined our team as a curatorial fellow. But she is now a full-time permanent curator, which makes me very excited for our future. So I know that Felicia and Timothy have the deepest respect for each other, so I'm very excited to have a public program like this, to see that sharing of stories and wisdom gleaned from many years in relation to this place and to the collection and art and each other, and those stories that are inseparable from the path that we chart towards the future that we want to live in. So I want to thank our funders, our donors, our staff, and our volunteers for making this possible, and a sincere thank you to our ongoing operating supporters, the MacKenzie Art Gallery Operating Endowment Fund at the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation, the Canada Council for the Arts, Sask Arts, the University of Regina, Sask Lotteries through Sask Culture, and the City of Regina. So without further ado, Tim and Felicia, please take the stage.
Well, I'm much more nervous than I thought I'd be. It feels very momentous. I'm very glad to have been invited to have this conversation with you, Timothy. Really honored. I've learned so much from Timothy. Before we start, I'd like to introduce myself in my language. Tanse, Felicia Gay Sniga Aswit, from Ninaoche Waskai Ganik, so that's the name for Cumberland House, Saskatchewan. So I was Saskatchewan born, so yeah. And as John had mentioned, Timothy's been here 35 years. Collection is, 5,000 pieces and continually growing. I've learned so much about collections. It's always been a great interest of mine. And Timothy and I really enjoy storytelling. Everybody knows Timothy is a storyteller, and so we really vibe. We can go on and on about the artwork, so hopefully you'll enjoy what Timothy and I have to say. So, oh yes, I have the clicker, I forgot. Oh, there it is. So I'd like to start out with a work by Faye Heavyshield. This piece was procured by Timothy into our collection, and which is really amazing because Faye Heavyshield was, not an artist that was recognized enough, especially in the, in the Prairie region. This piece is called Episkaye in Blackfoot, and as John mentioned, I'm doing my PhD, and my project was the Art of Faye Heavyshield, which was a huge project. Came with a catalog, a film, and in terms of such a large-scale production, in terms of the grants and everything, Timothy really came through as a mentor, and it was really my first. Even though I had been here a while, it was our first opportunity to really, get to know one another, much more on a deeper level. Would you say?
Yeah, no, it was great, and it felt so. Yeah, it felt so natural to be able to connect around works by an artist that we both respected and had interesting conversations with. I mean, I remember my first encounters with Faye. It was after Leanne Martin had left the gallery. She was head curator here between 1998 and 2001, as some of you will know, and was our first Indigenous head curator, first in a mainline institution in Canada. So it was really important time at the gallery in terms of its understanding of the place of Indigenous curation. And I was missing her. I really loved working with Leanne. I'd learned a lot, and she's just such a wonderful person. So when she left, I felt a kind of a longing. Part of it was because, you know, we didn't hire anybody right away, so I was the only curator, and I was just kind of lonely in general. But there's been a few periods like that here at the gallery. But I remember going to a show that Leanne curated at the Walter Phillips Gallery in Banff called Mapping Our Territories.
Right.
And so I went out to that show. I think there might have been some kind of gathering around that, and saw the exhibition that had this piece by Faye in it.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with it. I mean, I really just thought this was an extraordinary piece. So simple, so elegant, but just filled with the kind of emotions that come with loss, but also with an understanding of continuity, of ongoing presence in families, and it just was so beautiful. And it greets you every time you see it, because as you go to it,
It responds to you.
it responds to you
Yeah.
as the air passes between you and the work.
Yeah.
And it really talks about where you are.
Yeah.
And so I thought this would be a great piece for the collection. Working with Kate Davis, our director at the time, we brought it in. And then we thought, well, we've got to install it and show it. And because acquiring works is really pointless unless you display them.
Right.
Really. I mean, people always ask me, well, when are you going to show, such and such in the vault? And I did a calculation once, and I think I came up with the figure of 75 to 80% is what I've been able to show of the collection.
Nice. Yeah.
Now,
It's amazing. Yeah.
Can't do it all at once. It's over subsequent. But I'm always, the first time you show a work is always special. And we brought Faye in.
Yeah.
And so this is when I really got a chance to talk to Faye. And I remember going for supper with her at Earl's. And we got talking about language, which is a favorite topic of hers,
Yes.
favorite topic of mine.
Yeah.
And she's just, teach me some Blackfoot, Faye. It's just like...
He's asked me about Cree as well.
Yeah. And oh man, I'm not the. I don't remember much about that lesson, but I do remember learning the word for this piece, apaskayao.
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful moment to hear it spoken.
Yeah.
And then to have her come back.
Yes.
And then have that conversation again with her.
Yeah.
I mean, the show you curated was so beautiful, and up there in the space, filled with memories. And there was that piece, the Untitled, the Lodge.
All right.
I don't know if you remember the piece with is it 12 standing,
Yeah, it's
I
like,
don't know, poles?
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's a really abstracted version of like a lodge. But it also, they're bones. So it's like
Yeah,
connection
yeah.
to how your home is also connected to the body and to the land. It's really
Right.
beautiful.
And it was in a show here at the MacKenzie Art Gallery in 1992-93 called Land, Spirit, Power,
Right.
which was an important exhibition marking the quincentennial of Columbus,
Yeah.
National Gallery decided to, finally get around to dealing with contemporary Indigenous art. Came here, and that piece was the first piece you saw when you entered the Kenderdine Gallery.
Right.
But then you had it in the opposite end of that gallery, in
Yeah.
the opposite corner.
Yeah.
And I remember when Faye came and she was working with you and you were looking at the installation. And I told her, Faye, this piece, it's taken 30 years to get across the gallery. And she just looked at me and she says, "What direction is that?" I said, "I think that's west." She said, "It wants to go home."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of Faye, the way she looks at art, like they're active beings, and they're
Yeah.
active stories. And one of the beautiful things about, I'll talk about it later, but the whole idea of lost stories, we'll come back to it. It really connects back to this piece.
Yes.
Yeah. This piece here is Daphne Ojig. The funny thing is, Timothy picked out this image, and then I mentioned to him the first art history essay I ever wrote was on Daphne Ojig. It's called The Storytellers. Can you tell me why you chose?
Yeah, and this is a piece that you'll see up in Whispers from the Vault. This people have been asking me, well, the pieces in Whispers from the Vault, are those your favorite works? And no, they're my favorite stories about works. There's a difference. How could I, call a work my favorite? I mean, it's especially with so many artists out in the audience there. Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
And thank you for making the work, because that's really what it's about. But this piece, I was thinking about storytelling, and I wanted to have a little section of the show that was about storytellers. Mm-hmm. And there was actually going to be 3 pieces in it. There was going to be an Anne Harbus, that has a little little portrait of David Thalberger in it, carrying one of her paintings. But I didn't have the space for it. But I wanted this piece in because it spoke to me about something that you wrote about in your essay for the Faye Heavy Shield show.
Right.
And there you were describing your conversations with Faye about how the storyteller, and I think it was Faye talking about it, right?
Yeah, in the film.
That when she was remembering storytellers from her youth.
Yeah.
And what happened was there's always a moment where the storyteller just recedes into the background and you're just living in the story.
Yeah, that's right.
And then I thought, that's what's going on in this artwork.
Yeah.
Because you're looking here at the eyes and the mouth and the lips of the storyteller. But it's as if that storyteller is disappearing.
Yeah.
Is receding into, it looks like the woods, into the bark of a tree. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, this is around the time when she was going to the Wickwemicong powwows and experiencing, as she described it, a rebirth of her Indigenous identity.
Yeah.
And I can feel it in this. I mean, people say, it's Cubism, but it's not. This is not. There's maybe elements of Cubism that she's referencing, or they freed her up to do something, but they freed her up to do something else. Mm-hmm. And it's really to talk about this extraordinary life of story that you find in communities everywhere.
It's
but
true, yeah.
It has a specific life within the Indigenous community that she would belong to, and others. So I wanted to put that in there as a kind of a marker of the importance of story and about the things I've learned about it over the years, from listening to writers like you and artists like Faye and Daphne and so many others who do that in their work.
Yeah, I think it's really, I find it so valuable that you see that, like the whole notion of the storyteller, the storyteller is not important. It's the story that's important.
Yeah.
It's not to see a storyteller. We're not valuing the person telling it. We're valuing the art, the story. And I've always seen artwork as stories, visual stories. It's kind of a transition from, Indigenous storytelling now in this visual form in this way. People call it contemporary, but is it? It's an ancient practice, and it's across the board worldwide, right? And I just love when, curators like us can just talk shop about the different ways we can look at art, different perspectives, and value all those things. And yeah, that's what I like about you. One of the questions I wanted to ask also was, from your childhood, what introduced you to the storytelling, and so I wanted to show. It's not a great picture.
Well, I mean, one of the, I have a lot of people I owe a debt to, but among them, the MacKenzie Gallery volunteers who showed up at Kitchener School one day with a bag full of artworks.
Yeah.
And I can still picture them in my mind.
Yeah.
They came alive when the docent was talking about them. I don't know who it was that day, but there was Mondrian's Broadway Boogie Woogie and a Bruegel painting, and it was just like, oh wow.
Yeah.
But learning about telling stories is something you learn in your home usually, and talking about art was something I did with my mom. I don't know, my grandfather, who was a grain grower and not a man with any artistic inclination that I know of, he gave us this gift to the family one Christmas of this large-scale book called 100 of the World's Most Beautiful Paintings. And this book lived underneath a cushion in the couch.
Oh, yeah?
It had to stay flat. It was an important book.
Oh, my gosh.
I don't know why it was under the couch. There wasn't a shelf big enough for it.
Yeah.
It's big, it's oversized. And every page was a reproduction, full-size page reproduction of an artwork. And my mother and I, we would pull this book out. I was the youngest, and it's a bit of my mother's pet. So we would get together and sit on the couch, and we'd spread this book, as I remember it, across our laps together.
Yeah.
And we'd look at artworks, and we'd talk to each other about what we liked. Why was that Japanese tiger so exciting to me? And why did she love that, vase of flowers by Utrillo, or, whoever.
Yeah.
And that's about you're learning to talk about the vocabulary if you're talking about images.
Yeah.
But even more important than that, you're learning about how to see an image through another person's eyes. Because that's how we discover the value of images, is through other people's eyes. We see things all the time, and maybe we think things, but that's where the value comes in, the desire.
Yeah. And there it began, right?
Yeah.
Right on
I
Mom's
remember one of the images was Georges Rouault's The Apprentice.
Yeah.
This beauty, and then I ended up doing a show about Georges Rouault.
Yeah.
So,
It's funny how it just all comes full circle. Yeah. We had a funny conversation earlier today about, we started off as artists, but we knew we weren't very good artists. I actually started off in archaeology because I liked Indiana Jones movies. They're so racist. I don't know why I loved them so much. And then I thought photography. I love photography, so I started off. And then we had a show, I was telling Timothy, I had a show at the Grant Gallery with Joy Arcand and another artist, Kruzelecki, and I put the show together. I wrote the write-up, I did some of that art, and then I realized, like maybe 5 years later, like I curated that. I actually like curated a show without knowing I curated.
Yeah.
And it's the same with Timothy. Like
Yeah, well,
we have like a little bend that goes that way.
yeah, because I was I have a BFA in visual art. You know,
Yeah.
I actually finished it. And,
Yeah.
You know, and had a show at the old Norman MacKenzie in the student gallery, titled "So Long."
That's funny.
Yeah, I remember we did a student show in a storefront gallery, and you know, people like Eric Norbratton and Diana Chabros and a bunch of others in it, Ray Stasis in that era, and called Art Rage Us.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Artists and their puns.
Yeah.
God.
And anyway, I became the student. I didn't call myself a curator because
Yeah.
we didn't know what curators were back then.
Yeah.
Honestly. There were artists and there were art critics, and that was it. But I was appointed the spokesperson for the group,
Right.
and I remember I went on to Gordon McInnes's noon hour talk show on CKCK.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I didn't take it terribly seriously. I was wearing a bow tie, but it was like one of those little clip-ons you give a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
That's where I actually started.
Yeah, there you go, yeah.
And I had a why not, my not button. And so like I arrive on the show and there's Gordon asking me, you know, well, what's my not? What's that about? And I said, my not is a state of mind. And it just went downhill from there. He said, I went to your show, and one of the works, I saw that there was a fly on the work. And I said, oh, Harry, you mean Harry? And he said, what do you mean, Harry? I said, that's Harry the fly. We pay him to fly around.
Jeez.
Oh.
Oh, that's funny. One of the other questions I want to talk about, you know, those people that really influenced you, those teachers, you know,
Yeah.
and, you know, obviously your schooling influences you.
Yeah.
You know, I have similar, you know, I can really relate to some of the stories you tell about your teachers because they really do, like, facilitate you into that next era of your career, I guess.
Yeah.
And how you think about things. Can you tell me a little bit about these wonderful dudes?
Yeah,
here?
well, these are, we were looking at some of my teachers in the previous slide. Maya Bismanis.
Yeah.
Just go back one slide. Yeah, so there you have Maya Bismanis in the mirror. And then we've got Ted Godwin and Jack Sears. I had a lot of artists who were important, and they were all, you know, Ted was a storyteller. I mean, honestly, I mean, he would, that's probably all we did in his class was listen to his stories about Clement Greenberg and Barnett Newman and Mark Roth. Anyway, I remember getting them all riled up once when, in one class, but when I started telling my own stories, but he was a character, and he made it come, you know, he made it sound like important,
Right.
you know, but it was really Maya who was my mentor.
Yes.
I mean, Roger Lee was another big important influence too earlier in my art history, but it was Maya who pointed me in the direction of art history.
Yeah.
Said, you know, maybe you should think about something other than visual art, you know, gently. And then, the reason she's shown like this, partly is because the piece is broken, but I wanted her floating in the air. Because that's the kind of person she was. Whenever I needed direction, there she kind of appeared out of the mists, like Athena in the Odyssey.
Yeah.
And she would say, go this way, do this. And she sent me off to grad school at the at the State University of New York at Stony Brook.
Yeah.
And then when I got back, she said, apply at the MacKenzie. They've got a job.
Yeah.
And now she's telling me it's time to retire.
Yeah.
But so many things, so many of the there's a number of exhibitions I did that were really thanks to her guidance and inspiration. And I'm still thinking about questions that she asked me. And like one of the ones that just keeps coming back to me is like, what is the ontology of the art object? Now that doesn't, what does the word ontology mean? I'm still working on that. But then she would say, what is it that makes artworks such special objects in the world?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just, it's one of those things that I keep coming back to. And we had and she encouraged me to think and to think creatively.
Yeah.
Think hard and think creatively. And so that was very freeing, very, very encouraging and motivating. Yeah. And that's, it's carried me through my career.
Right. You need those kind of really generative relationships.
Yeah.
I remember my mom saying to me often, you need someone who's kind of above you as a mentor. You need a sister next to you, someone next to you, and then you need someone who you can give a hand to. And that's how it should always be in your life, right?
Yeah.
And it does bring things full circle, even in the workplace and in school, whatever. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we move to the next?
Sure. Yeah, and of course, the education continues, and I've learned so much from the artists in this community. Mm-hmm. And I've got 3 here. There's where do I?
It's a big list.
It's a big list, but these are the artists. Some of the artists I've done retrospectives with.
Yes.
There's Wilf Perot, Vic Sikansky, David Thalberger. Mm-hmm. Who else have that we saw? Joe's work, Marilyn Levine. Mm-hmm. The retrospective we did of Jack Sears was really important. Working with Sandra Semchuk. These are people that you sort of idolize, and then you have a chance to work with them.
Yeah.
They're the people that for me sort of set up my understanding of where I'm from.
Right.
When Wilf paints a back alley, that's the back alley I grew up in North Central. Yeah. 8 block Elphinstone. Yeah. That was, he painted those alleys. And, Vic and his cans of jar, the sealers, that was my job as a kid, to go down into the cellar and pick out a can of fruit. That was our dessert. Was it going to be cherries or Saskatoons or peaches or nectarines or apricots or the plums that my sister canned. She's in the front row here.
I heard the story.
There was we had 2 plum trees in our backyard. One produced really lovely, delicious plums, and one produced very sour, disagreeable plums. And
it's a
one
metaphor.
year my sister took it in her mind to can the disagreeable plums. But they were pretty. I have to give you that. They were a pretty color. And my dad ate them. He liked them.
I love that though, how you can locate yourself in works, and especially I think that's why it's so important, regional artists and that we have those kind of works in our collection that people can really identify with.
Like David, and he grew up in Holdfast, which was just the next town over from Dilk, where my mother grew up, and we'd have these conversations, about the rivalry between Holdfast and Dilk. Yeah. It was epic.
Yeah.
There's the Holdfast kids coming to Dilk for a ball game and shouting, "Dilk, flour, milk." But this is the world that very much the world of my parents. Yeah. And the world that I sort of grew up.
We actually have That's funny. Like we actually had, so in Cumberland House, it's an island actually, if you don't know. So we had that with the paw in Manitoba, or like an hour apart. And so we called them the fur paw, and they called us Temptation Island.
Classic.
Classy. We are very classy. So we have these here, and it's about like, you never know what you're going to find in the vault.
No, you do not.
Yeah.
And you never know who you're going to meet down there.
Yes, yeah. I don't know anybody down there, actually. I'm just kidding. I will get to know them.
Well, just this week, Marie, our registrar, got a call from one of the descendants of English Sheldon Williams, and they wanted to come and see the work.
Yeah.
And I'm always happy to take people down with a connection to the work.
Yeah, and you probably learn so much. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Remember we had Mike Bird here, working, and he was a descendant of a Takakoop.
Yeah.
And we had of this beautiful pastel portrait by Edmund Morris.
Yeah.
And that was his family. You know,
Yeah.
it's like these are the things that are incredible. So we have a couple here.
Yeah.
So like there's Cloth of Gold by Mashal Teitelbaum. It's a painting that we don't show often. And I laugh when I look at it because my uncle Lou, he went to art school in Calgary after the war, and he learned how to paint. And then he came back to the farm, and he painted the grain truck door with a pinup girl, not unlike this one.
Oh my!
She had a bathing suit.
Yeah.
My grandma.
At least, right?
Anyway, but she was a beauty, right? And this is from 1945. It's of that same era.
Yeah.
And I always looked at this painting as with a little bit of embarrassment, because it is kind of like a pinup girl. But Mashal went on to do really significant work.
Yeah.
So and this is him learning his craft. But one day, Marie, again, she gets the calls. She says, Tim, we got somebody, this woman, she wants to see this painting in the vault. She says, she thinks it's her mother. So I'm thinking, let's go down the vault and look at this.
Just nosy.
So we went down there, and this woman, maybe I won't reveal name. She didn't tell us to withhold her name, but at the same time, this is Jerry. This is her mother. She had a picture of her mom, and this is who this is. And the story was that she was from LeBret, and her father was the manager of the CN station. And for the 2 summers that Mashal Teitelbaum spent in the Qu'Appelle Valley, they were friends. They hung around.
Right.
And that was those golden years in the summer in Qu'Appelle Valley. And she never talked about sitting as a model.
Yeah.
But then
How did she find out?
There was an exhibition called Tales of Qu'Appelle,
Right.
Tales of Two Valleys, that Dan Ring did, another great colleague and inspiration. And she got a copy of the catalog, and it was reproduced in there. Right. And she saw it, and she thought, I think that's my mother.
Got a little jolt there.
So she wanted to see it in the flesh.
Yeah.
And so, So
in the flesh, right?
In the Fine for you to say.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting day in the vault.
Yeah.
Another one is you see this Ming Dynasty vase, which hadn't even been accessioned into the collection at one point. I mean, when MacKenzie died, he had all these things that people called artworks, paintings and sculptures, but he had a bunch of things he called antiquities, idols and all sorts of cuneiform and cultural objects of different types. And then he had this vase, and the thing is that when he died, they were held in great esteem. But when professional curators came on the scene, they started looking at these things with a little more criticality. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it all came under a big question mark. Are these things authentic?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, or is this like a 19th century knockoff, or
right.
you know, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get a call, and there's two guys, Richard Godfrey and James Carter, and they're doing a pleasure tour of Western Canada, and they want to know if we have any Asian antiquities in our collection that we could see, that they could see.
What year was this? Who does a pleasure tour?
Like, I don't know, like 1995 or something.
Okay.
That's 6 or something. I don't know. And I thought, yeah, we've got some Asian antiquities. Yeah, well, come on down. You're free to look at it. We don't think much of it, you know.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases. Gail Chin was starting to look at it. So this is there was a tension coming. But so I take him down, and the two of them are down there, and you know, James Godfrey worked for Christie's, and then he was Sotheby's head of Chinese art in Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. You know, this is a guy who knows his stuff.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
And he comes down, and we're just walking over to the shelves where this stuff is, and he just shoots ahead.
Yeah.
Grabs this vase.
Wow.
And starts looking at it.
Yeah.
I said, you know, like, no permission, no gloves, no nothing.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Just used to handling this stuff. And he says, Ming Dynasty. This is worth 5 figures. What else do you have? He said, you know, a really good one would be worth 6 figures, but this isn't bad. You know,
oh my God.
What? Anyway, so sadly, we didn't have any others.
Yeah. Yeah.
We do have a lot of the Buddhist sculpture, and he was really interested in that. Both of them were, and they identified. He says you've got like 6 pieces that are of real value, and then another 20 that are good.
Yeah.
And so it really turned me on my head. And then Gail working with the collection and some of her students, and we really got a much firmer grasp on what we had. And it really marked a kind of a turning of the tide in our appreciation of Mackenzie's collection. And we just continued that research and realizing that, not everything he got was gold. Yeah. But there are things there of real value.
Yeah. That's such a funny story. And you didn't have to pay for the appraisal.
Yeah.
It would have been a mint.
Anyway, we accessioned the piece soon afterwards.
Yeah, no kidding. Here we have a lovely picture. I can't wait for you to talk about this. It's called Making Friends and Influencing the Next Generation. I think this is incredibly important part of your career. And Michelle Lavallee, she's a good friend of mine as well. Tell me more. Yeah,
well, like what you were saying, you need to be able to have opportunities to pass on what you know.
Yes, yeah.
And this really goes back again to Leanne Martin and to Kate Davis, because Kate had a vision that this gallery could do something special in terms of engagement with Indigenous art and artists and curators. And, you know, there was already a history with Bob Boyer and, you know, shows like New Work by a New Generation, or, you know, Edward Potteris and others. Yeah. So she saw the potential and hired Leanne. Now, when I say hired Leanne, that was 2 years of incessant badgering.
Yeah, headhunted.
You know, and you know, she wasn't ready. Meanwhile, I'm the only curator at the gallery. Yeah. When's this woman coming who's supposed to, like, you know? So but then she arrives, and it was great, and she transformed things. She insisted that we have Indigenous art on display in every exhibition band. And, you know, she acquired amazing pieces like the Robert Houle work that we showed in our pandemic show.
Yeah,
That was the first thing we did together.
Yeah, our first show together.
Yeah, a lot of credit to Kate for having that vision. And then Nan left. And so we thought, well, okay, I was hired as the head curator. And then we thought, well, it really is important to have Indigenous voices on staff. So we did a search, and we did another search, and finally we found Pat Dedman, and she came and she did some beautiful shows. She did a great Mary Pratt show, as well as a great Mary Longman show. We have the Mary Longman piece out in the front of the gallery as a result. And then she left, and then it was like, okay, we go back to the well, we do a search, nobody comes up that we're really interested in, do another search, then it dawns on us, you have to go out into the community, you have to form the relationships if you want the people to work. That's true, yeah. So I ended up going to Saskatoon to the ACC meeting, the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective, now the IC.
Yeah,
ICC, Indigenous Curatorial Collective. It was their second meeting.
Yeah.
What a great group a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking for young Indigenous curators. So there was a panel, and that Michelle was on, and a couple other people. And now I have to, okay, Felicia's, I'm telling her this story as we're preparing for this talk, and she says, you know, I was on that panel.
Thanks, Timothy.
Yeah. Oh, what might have been. You had other important things to do.
I was running a gallery at the time.
You had a gallery already.
Yeah.
And, you know, that was community work that needed to be done.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then Michelle, so I'm talking to Michelle, I'm talking to some of the other young curators, and there was a party or some kind of gathering at Wanuskewin, and I had a car, so we all piled into my car, and there were more people than seat belts. And it was like, there were way more people than seat belts. And they're kind of looking at me, is he going to freak out? And I realized it was the test. Test.
Yeah.
Is he going to freak out? Is he going to get all uptight on us? No, we're just going to go. I met Ramses, I met Michelle, and we hit it off. And I said, come to Regina and interview for the job at least.
Yeah.
And so a couple of the curators came, and we ended up hiring Michelle. And it ended up being, you know, I was hoping for another 3 years. It seemed about what we could get out of people from Ontario. But she stayed for 10. And they were 10 incredible years. And, you know, you see here on this slide, one of the highlights from that time, which was the Professional Native Indian Artists Inc.
Yeah.
And so Michelle was, you know, new. She'd had a little bit of curating experience in Toronto, but she was learning. And so that was where I felt I could help. And, you know, just with the mechanics of learning how to curate a show, studio visits, organizing things, shipping, installation. We went through everything, and writing, and we worked on her writing. And then she did some, she was really doing some great work, like the Vernon Aki show still resonates in my mind. And then she says, I want to do a history of the Professional Native Indian Artists Inc., you know, the Indian Group of 7.
Just that?
Just that, you know?
It's huge.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, well, it took me, I did the Regina Clay show after I'd been working at the gallery for 15 years.
Right.
And that show just about killed me.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was a great show, and I loved it, but I knew what it costs to do a show like that.
Yeah.
And I thought, are you ready for it? And she says, I think I am. I want to give it a try. And so Kate and I, and we talked, and we said, okay, let's see what the girl can do.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, did she ever
Boy, she came through.
reward our trust.
Yeah.
Because this is what I've learned about this mentorship process. It's a process of giving. Mm-hmm. And the number one thing you can give is trust.
Yeah.
And that's the number one thing you can get in return is trust. Mm-hmm. And that's what we forged.
Yeah.
So I look back at that as one of my main accomplishments in my time here at the MacKenzie. And watching Michelle curating up in the gallery with Sochil on her lap.
Yeah.
I mean, those are just memories that,
Yeah, it's amazing.
Gonna
Yeah,
stay.
just to say, like, producing those big shows, you need a big box of Kleenex because you're gonna have a lot of tears. Like, there's such, so emotionally challenging. Having to roll with the punches. So you really need that team.
Yeah.
And
this is the other thing I could say about MacKenzie, and can't say enough, is the thank you to our team here, because you don't work by yourself as a curator, and you can only accomplish great things if you've got great teammates. And I've always had the best team to work with here.
Yeah.
So thank you. I can't name you all because I will miss names, but there's so many of you out there, and it's from the bottom of my heart, my thanks.
Yeah, that's amazing. I feel like one of the things I really value about the MacKenzie is just that. So I come from Artist Friend Center background, and you pretty much, you're a janitor, you're a prep, you're, you're doing the budget. I did it on a ledger. We're similar in that way. Everything's written. We really balked at, doing everything on the computer, and we transition nicely, I think.
Yeah, we're getting there.
We're getting there, yeah. But what was the point of that? I'm lost. This often happens when we talk.
Well, things have changed so much.
Yeah.
Well, it has changed.
Yeah.
When I first started working at the MacKenzie here, I was working on an electric typewriter.
Yeah.
And having to log all my long distance calls. I mean, it was just like another world. There was one computer, and it was the secretary to the director who had it, Muriel Garvey. Oh my goodness. Yeah, she, and the 10-inch floppy disks.
Yeah.
Anyway, nobody wants to hear that stuff.
Let's go on. Okay. So I think probably one of the questions is what a lot of people don't understand is sometimes, there's a narrative within artwork. Of course, curators, they can interpret that narrative however they may. But sometimes there's some barriers to that. And I thought this was a great example, a story to talk about that.
Yeah, well, I mentioned Rouault, and I had a transformative encounter with a painting by Georges Rouault many years ago at the National Gallery of Canada. I won't go into the full story, but it's part of one of my podcasts. But it started me on a journey, and I talked about that with Maya, and Maya said, "Oh, look at this other artist here, Arno Freiner," and he said, "You should do a show." And I'm going what are these two artists?
What's the connection?
What's the connection?
Yeah.
They're working with the image of Christ, but Reiner's putting these hand paintings on photographs of historical images. But I slowly kind of figured out what he was doing, and what the connection was. It was about framing, about how you frame an image, and how you frame it with your body, in a way. Mm-hmm. And so it started me on this journey, and I got a MAP grant, got money to go to Europe, because I knew I had to meet with Arno Freiner's dealer in Vienna. And then I had a trip planned to Paris to see the Rouault paintings in the collection of the Pompidou and the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris, and see if I could persuade them to loan some works.
Right.
So I went off there with high hopes, and Brenda was with me to help me with the French. And again, this is another thing curators don't do in isolation, is they don't curate without the support of their spouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually not support so much as long suffering. Brenda often talks about there should be a club for curators' spouses.
Oh, yeah, it's true.
Mutual support
Yeah.
society.
Yeah.
But we had fun on this trip to Paris, and she speaks French fluently, and I thought, well, this will be great. I'll have somebody to support me.
Yeah.
So we went, and I was having great conversations with curators. I mean, it was down in the vault of the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris.
Wow, what a high.
And they have their rouleaus laid out on a table.
Yeah.
And then she says, oh, wait a minute, I have something I want to show you.
Yeah.
And she wanders off into the vault and then picks something up off of the rack, brings it over on the table, and plunks it down beside the rouleau.
Yeah.
It's a Matisse.
Yeah.
It's like their third string Matisse that's in the vault. You know, it's like, we have a Matisse, it's on the wall.
Yeah.
It's a Matisse. He said, look at the background. This is when they were both students together studying with Gustave Moreau.
Yeah.
And that background of these two paintings shows the influence of his color.
Yeah.
How nice of you to be able to go in the vault to show me
all
this.
nonchalant here.
Yeah. This is like, that's a vault.
Yeah, yeah.
But then I had a meeting scheduled with the daughter of Georges Rouault.
Yeah.
And this is an important meeting because she held copyright.
Yeah.
So if I wanted to do a publication, I was going to need her approval.
That's right, yeah.
And I'd sent her all the material in advance and arranged this visit and got to her door, a little apartment, and I remember she opened the door. This elderly lady, I think she must have been 90 at the time.
Yeah.
And she says in this beautiful, educated Parisian French, I hope you didn't come all this way just to see me. Because I'm afraid I have bad news to announce.
Oh my God.
This show must not go on.
No.
But anyway, you're welcome. You know, it's like, what? And so Brenda and I, we go and we have tea, and her nephew's there. She was deaf, and he was the only one she could really understand. And so I'm trying to explain the show and why it should happen. And she, you know, she's not going to be persuaded, I could tell. So she as a parting gift, she gives me a book of her father's work. And, you know, and she goes to set it down on the coffee table. And then she sees on the coffee table a photograph of one of the Arnold Reiner paintings that I had sent.
Yeah.
And she just goes like this. She sees the painting, goes like this, and then puts the painting somewhere else, the book somewhere else. She didn't even want it to come in contact. Wouldn't even touch
Father's
that.
art.
This crazy Austrian. So,
Yeah.
and I thought, okay, well that's it. You know, she can't stop me from doing the show,
Yeah.
but she can stop me from doing the publication.
That's right, yeah.
Maybe I have to do 2 publications. I don't know. So let that one sit and talked it over with Kate, and you know, we commiserated. And 6 months later, I get a call from Reiner's dealer
Yeah.
in Vienna, and she says it's all fixed.
Oh my God.
So what happened? Said, well, it turns out that Arnold Reiner's daughter was best friends with the granddaughter of one of Georges Rouault's oldest friends.
Wow. Yeah.
They both live in Paris, and they had lunch. And they said, this show has to happen.
Yeah.
And we know how to get around Mademoiselle Rouault.
Oh my gosh.
And by the way, every institution I went to in Paris whenever I mentioned that I was going to see Mademoiselle Rouault, they said they'd get this look in their face.
Oh,
They
yeah.
said, "What's she saying today?" So she kind of she terrorized people.
Yeah, it sounds like.
And she prevented work from happening
Yeah.
on her father's her career.
Yeah.
Because she was trying to enforce this very narrow interpretation of his work through a formalist lens.
Yeah.
And anybody who was talking about the iconography or the wider social significance or anything else,
She shut it down.
She shut it down.
Yeah.
And, you know, I could see the effect. You know, when I was a student, I'd go to the Museum of Modern Art and I could see Rouault paintings.
Yeah.
Last time I was there, no Rouault paintings. His reputation is dying on the vine, and she's responsible for it in large part.
Yeah.
I mean, it's partly a change in taste, and you know, he's Catholic and it's maybe out of favor, but there's something, yeah, I realized that, you know, if a work isn't being talked about, if the stories aren't being told,
Yeah.
it just fades.
That's the terrible thing about subverting voices, you know.
Yeah.
I see that a lot even with Indigenous art and how a lot of the stories have been subverted. So like these spaces in the gallery can become these sovereign spaces, these places of power where artists can actually have a voice, and that goes the same with, you know, this instance. I think it's like really important to mention that, like the different hoops you kind of have to go through just to have these artists have a space. Oh, am I dinging? What's going on? It's good?
Yeah, just keep it tight.
Yeah. So, where are we at by time? Because we said, I bet you we'll talk like 3 hours. We need to facilitate ourselves here.
We can maybe just pass over a couple things, but I mean, you've got here some of the work that I did during the pandemic.
This is a highlight. So I got to experience this incident. It's kind of like a one-in-the-lifetime thing for curators to discover something.
Recover.
Recover, that's a better word for it. Yeah.
Crystal's always saying, artists formerly known. Yeah, which is a nice way of putting it.
Yeah.
Like that, where we don't know the name of the artist. They're known. They're known to people. They were known.
Yeah.
So it's like they're not maybe unknown, but they're unidentified at this point.
Yeah.
So
in this instance.
Yeah, well, I mean, so this was the joy of working with Francesco Fredolini, colleague of mine. Got to know Francesco through Yvonne Petrie, who's just finished her term as Dean of Luther College, and has been a long time friend and member of a reading group that I attend every Friday night, and many of them are here. Thank you for coming. They're my support group. Yeah. And Yvonne invited Francesco to join our group along with his wife, Annalisa.
Who I went to school with.
Yeah, and they were fresh from he was doing a fellowship at the Getty, and then originally from Italy, and they were wanting to meet people, and so they came until the kids came, and then but we still kept in contact. But I'd always thought it would be nice to work with Francesco as an art historian, and then we finally got around to talking about doing something with the MacKenzie collection. So we were going to work on drawings. And I remember him having this meeting at Common Ground over at the university, and we just sketched the whole thing out, and we were going to call it The Multiple Lives of Drawings was the first one. Because drawings have all these different possible lives that paintings don't have. And then at the end, you know, he looked at me and he said, "Now, Tim, you know you're going to have to do research." I'm going,
who,
research? Isn't that what we're doing? Like I'm organizing a show here, but this is like Italian Renaissance stuff, you know? My master's is in 20th century art criticism, and I did a thesis on Dan Graham, you know, video conceptual art, you know.
Little different, hey?
Yeah, a little different. But then, he just looked at me even more intensely and said, no, you must do research. And when Francesco says something to you, you do it, you know? So I thought, okay, Francesco, I'll do research. So then the pandemic hits, and I got nothing but, I got a computer and a couch and time. And so I just thought, well, okay, let's dig in. I've got we've got 20 drawings. We know the identity of maybe 6 of them. Mm-hmm. Let's look at the other 14 and see what we can find out.
Yeah.
And in the end, I was able to identify 3 of them.
Yeah, yeah.
And, by luck, by sheer dint of looking at thousands of images, I mean, this is the thing. It's like all the great collections are online now. So you can go to the Louvre and look at every drawing in their collection. Yeah. And that's what I was doing. I was just looking at every drawing that I thought was from the time period and just looking for similarities. Yeah. And there they are. And then I found, we did the painting show and I found a painting just because of a piece of drapery that looked familiar.
That's right.
Yeah. But that was a thrill. And it was addictive. It's like a drug. This connoisseurship, I totally got why people do it. Yeah. It's like, I'd be sending Francesco these emails, what do you think? What do you think? Yeah. And I'd just be checking my inbox. Did I get it? Did I get it? Yeah. And he'd say, no, I don't know. I think that doesn't look Spanish to me. No. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's so exciting. The successes.
That's very cool. This project, a little different from Renaissance.
Yeah. Well,
Mag Dance. Yeah. Actually, I was pretty surprised when the first time you curated it. I hadn't heard very much about it, but now really kind of seeing it happen. I think there's a culmination of things that I see that you've learned from with your relationship to dance, being in such a space, like a gallery space. It's so out of realm usually, you see it, a little more now, but the way you've curated as this ongoing, feature is really special. So I was just wondering, what were some of those surprising elements or revelations that you got from?
Well, the whole thing was a revelation. Yeah. Right from the beginning, right from the first time I saw Diane Fraser and Robin Puntress dance in a cattle pen at the Regina exhibition. Yeah. And I wrote a piece of art, dance criticism. It was the first piece of writing about the New Dance Horizons. Yeah. And it was a momentous occasion because it was not only the beginning of that relationship, but the young summer intern that they assigned me at the Regina exhibition to guide me that day was my future wife. Yeah. Pretty nice day.
So one of those revelations was a sweetheart in the mix. Yeah.
Just friends at the time. Yeah. But working with Robin over the years, we did a list of all the things she's done at the MacKenzie, and it's extraordinary. And it goes back even before I was there, back into the mid '80s, and it's really been a consistent engagement that's unlike anything in Canada. Mm-hmm. I don't know, anywhere, I don't know. But the Mag Dance, it was a bit of a fluke. I mean, we had a gap in the exhibition schedule. She wanted to do something in the gallery between shows, and I'm looking at an empty gallery and a space on the schedule, very little money to work with, and I just thought, hey, Robin, do you want to be the show? Come on in, and then the more I thought about it, the more it felt like an interesting idea. Yeah. Because she has a long engagement with art, going back to her father and Cliff Weens and the Regina Five, and she's been working in relationship to artworks pretty much through her entire career, and working with Edward Quattress as well as a collaborator, continuing that collaboration. It's extraordinary. And so to put together a show where you have dance and then art, it did something, and it was greater than the sum of the parts. And I realized, it's really taken 5 tries at it to really start to feel what was going on there. That these 2 art forms were in dialogue in a way, that the paintings and the artworks in the space were absorbing the energy of dance.
Yeah.
The walls themselves were taking the energy of dance in a way that doesn't happen in a theater.
Yeah.
And vice versa. The dancers were feeling things that they were not feeling in other venues.
Yeah.
And it's because of the embodied nature of visual art and the framed nature of dance. This is what happens, is that in dance the frame is sort of invisible. But you put it in a gallery and you start to see the frame. The dance floor has a different appearance.
Yeah.
It is a kind of like a frame on the floor.
Yeah, yeah.
And then similarly, the artworks, you start to realize that the head of a dancer could come out of the middle of a painting at any moment. And we saw that happen one day with an amazing performance of a Francois Sullivan Je Parle with Jeanette Poutin, where we saw the head of a dancer come out from the middle of a painting, walk into the space and start spinning. And it changed my idea of what art is.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, so I mean, this is what happens sometimes when you just play a hunch.
Yeah, it's true. I had a similar experience I mentioned to you, where I had curated a Norval Morisseau show.
Yeah.
And I had a coinciding symposium, and so I invited a young Indigenous professional ballet dancer, and I asked her to come look at the artwork and create a choreography for it. And so, during our panels, we got up and we went to the gallery, and she did this choreography, and it was so engaging and beautiful and so different. Like, it was so emotive, like, and emotional.
Yeah.
Sometimes you look at dancers, it's a little boring, honestly. Like, it's just, it's this choreography, but this was like, she was engaging the art.
Yeah.
She embodied it.
Yeah.
You know?
No, it's incredible. Well, the next mag dance is on you, so.
Oh my gosh. Just hits me up with that out of nowhere.
But,
yeah.
And you see, I actually got a chance to create a performance.
Yeah, I see you there. I see you.
Some of you might remember me walking backwards. Which for me was kind of the culmination of that engagement, to actually take dance into my own body.
Yeah.
And give it back to the people in that room.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, Paul-André Fortier said, "Tim, you're not just brave, you're daring." I said, if you'd come to me when you were 20, I could have made you into a dancer.
Aww, right on. Still can happen. Got a lot of time coming. This is another important, show that you've done, and it really bodes the question, what's next? What are you going to be doing next?
Well, when people ask me what am I doing next, I think what I want to think about is things that came to me that came into focus for me when I worked on this project, Prairie Interlace, which I co-curated with Julia Kruger and Michelle Hardy, 2 extraordinary collaborators. And I've had so many great collaborators over the years, too many to name, but I learned, when I did the Regina Clay show, I learned, curating big shows by yourself is stupid. Share the work. Like it's life gets a lot better when you collaborate.
Spread it out.
And when you really collaborate, which means you're sharing, you're giving, it means giving something, but you get so much more back. And this was the case here, working, because Julie and I had done the Vic Sikansky retrospective, and we were looking at each other, and she says, "Well, what do you think we should do next?" And she said, "Well, maybe we could do something on weaving."
Yeah.
Because And I said, yeah, we got that big Caius Snelma Harris. Well, let's do something. Not really even giving it a lot of thought. But then it just turned into this extraordinary adventure into a world that was, I feel like I should have known more about. I mean, I knew a little bit, you know, I'd seen Anne Newdigat's work over the years and some of the other artists, but it was sort of like this thing. But then it was like this thing. I remember going to this show at the Nickel Galleries, and we curated it in COVID. We didn't see a lot of the work, and then seeing it for the first time and just being awestruck.
Yeah, it's such a dramatic space.
But what these artists had done, I just kept thinking, what were they doing? And then the question occurred to me, what is the frame of weaving? And because it's not the same as other kind of visual art. It's not the same as photography or painting or sculpture or those other media. That have its root in the icon. It comes out of something else. It doesn't need a frame. It never needed a frame. Now it's in a frame, but it doesn't need it. And so that's what I'm continuing to think about, is this question of frames from an expanded perspective, beyond the frame of Western art. And we've had conversations about what that means for Indigenous practices, like Alan Sapp and Faye and others. Thinking about Asian art and ceramics and everything else. I was all just rethinking everything. I'm just rethinking everything, and now I'm thinking like the 35 years I had here were just a preparation to think about these things.
Now to write. Now to write about it.
So I want to write more, and you know. When I think about it, I'm just so incredibly grateful for all the opportunities I had here that I was given by the various directors over the years, going back to Andrew Oko and then Kate. And, you know, we have Jeremy's here who filled in and was one of our transformative directors, and then Stuart, Reed, and now with Anthony Kendall and John. We've just had such great directors here, working with Crystal, and I've been given so many opportunities that I just, you know, where else could I have done all this? You know, where? Who would give you that chance?
And the way you framed your final show really speaks to all those experiences and relationships and stories. I know we had a final thought about, you know,
we have one more slide.
Why did you curate Whispers?
Why did I do Whispers for my last show? You know, of all the things. Well, it was because it's this, thinking about the tours in the vault over the years, as John was saying at the thank you for that introduction, John. That was beautiful. And because it really has been a through line. I mean, I started off working on the MacKenzie collection and writing a chapter for Bill Riddell's book, and been thinking about that collection ever since. And so I thought, well, it's also fun talking about all the stories. I like the storytelling. It's something I've enjoyed. Because being down in the vault is kind of like a mode of communication, and it's a place of research, but it's also a place of communication where I learn things. I mean, I put up this, we have this last image here, where of the little Andrea del Sarto that I took over to Italy as an art courier for an exhibition at the Accademia in Florence. And it was traveling with St. Joseph's that really sort of helped me bring it all into focus. Because we were going there, and then we got stuck in customs. Because I didn't have the papers to get St. Joseph back into the European Union. I mean, you would think that like he'd be considered a citizen because I mean he was made there in 1500. You know, like this drawing was made there, but didn't have the number that we needed. And thank goodness for Jochen, my guide, my German guide. He took care of me. But I ended up spending an extra night in Frankfurt wandering around, and on a walking along the banks of the river. I saw a statue, and it turned out to be a statue of St. Joseph.
Wow.
I took it as a sign.
It is.
It was
Totally.
in front of a Kindertagesschule. I think it was like a preschool.
Yeah.
St. Joseph's preschool. And they had this
Yeah.
big St. Joseph there. And I looked up at him and I thought, St. Joseph, you look tired. I was tired.
Yeah.
And then he looks tired, you know?
Yeah.
Because he's got something on his mind, and that's the care of a child that was not even his own.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, it's kind of like what I do. I take care of something that's not really my own.
That's right.
I care for that which I did not beget.
Yeah.
And I've been doing that for these 35 years. Trying to learn the stories, discover the stories, pass on the stories. And now I'm passing on that job to somebody else.
I have to tell you something funny I wasn't going to mention. When I first came to the gallery as a student, John was really coming to, wanting me to apply, and I wasn't interested. I had kind of been hurt from a prior institution, and I was a little suspicious of everybody. I didn't have a high view of the institution at all at that point, and I was thinking about going back to school, wasn't sure what to do, and so here comes Timothy, head curator, with his bow tie. And I'm like looking at him, I'm like, can I trust this dude? Like, after all I've been through. This guy has become such a great friend and mentor. I can't say enough about Timothy Long. Like, I've been so lucky to have met you and known you these 5 years, and I hope we can continue to be good friends outside. And I was telling his wife, I'll be knocking on the door, like, oh, we live down the road, and it's been a really great experience. You made things so easy. You're so open and kind. You give a lot of space to people, and I value that. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm not going to cry. I've been so weepy all day, gosh. But thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.
Yeah.